Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. On today's episode, we're going to see if the Dream Reef tank, has achieved everything I set it out to do in its 5-year anniversary. Alright, thank you for joining me on yet another episode of Parker's Reefs, and as touched on in the intro, we're about 4 years and 10 months into having water into the Dream Reef tank, and much further than that from when the project of the Dream Reef tank actually began. So I figured today would be a fantastic opportunity to just sit back, review, and see whether everything that I set out for this Dream Reef tank, did it achieve it? Did it get close? Or did it completely miss the mark now that we've hit that 5-year point? So without any further ado, let's jump into it. Now, a quick little Parker's Reef history reminder. About 7 years ago, which was about 5 years into the running of my previous display tank, which did sit here, I decided I wanted to do an upgrade, and I didn't just decide I wanted to strip the old tank out and put a new one in straight away. I knew that it was something that I wanted to take a lot of time, care, planning, and probably most importantly, saving for, because there were a number of things that I did not like about my previous display tank that I wanted to address, and realistically the only way to address them was to take that tank out and put a whole new tank in. Now, the challenge with that was that my previous display tank, particularly at that 5-year mark, looked incredible. It really was a very successful tank. And the idea, particularly when deep down inside, I kind of thought that my knowledge in the game was probably sketchy at best. And for me to get the results I had with that display tank, I considered myself to be incredibly lucky. Now, I have seen no shortage of people that have had incredible display tanks, pull them down, put a new tank in with better gear, a bigger tank, new modern ways of reefing, and they just never quite get to the mark that they did with their previous tank. And to be fair, I honestly thought I was going to go down that path if I did strip down that previous tank. So I wanted to take my time and really methodically plan out all of the issues I had with that system so that I would not make them again. And today I want to review those decisions and see whether I did manage to fix those issues or not, or whether history is repeating itself with this Dream Reef tank. So I set out with about 5 major tasks that I set myself when planning this Dream Reef tank that I wanted to make sure that I ticked off, or at least got as close as I could with the development of this tank. And I think at the 5-year mark, it's probably fair to review those. The first one was to not go down and make those same mistakes I did with the previous tank. And we'll dive in and discuss whether I think I've avoided those mistakes or whether I've repeated history or not. The second one, like most upgrades, I really wanted to go a tank that was a little bit bigger than my previous display. And not to say that my previous tank wasn't big, it was a 6x2 by 2.5, but I'll go into what I did to make this display as big as I possibly could. Thirdly, I wanted a tank that looked a bit more modern. We were at the point where I could do the upgrade of this tank because we were doing a little bit of a small house renovation and updating the interior of this house a little bit. I wanted to make sure that the new tank looked like it absolutely belonged in this setting. So we'll dive in and see whether I've ticked that box or not. The fourth one was to make sure that this tank was as easy to work on as possible. I knew that I was not getting any younger and that working on a tank, particularly by going bigger, was not going to get any easier whatsoever. So I wanted to set myself up for success by making it as easy as possible to work on. So we'll dive in and have a look at what I did to achieve that, or not achieve that. And the fifth and final mark that I set myself was to make sure that I did not just replicate the tank I had before, because it would be a huge amount of time, effort, and money to just take one tank down, put all of this work in, and end up with a tank that looks almost identical to the previous system. So we'll go over those 5 marks and see whether I've given myself a pass, A+, or maybe needs a little bit of work. And then to wrap things up, we'll get in nice and close and give this system a good 5-year review. I'll get the top down in, we'll have a look at how all of these corals go and have a look at the fish, and of course talk about what is next for the Dream Reef tank as it enters the second 5 years of its lifespan. Alright, so the first one of those marks that I talked about was about fixing the mistakes from my previous tank. And I've got to say that was absolutely the catalyst in me wanting to upgrade the tank. Not that there was anything majorly wrong with my previous system, and I did have it for 7 years, which is a pretty good run for a reef tank. And I think most people who have saw it either online or in person would say that it was a pretty spectacular looking tank. However, as you guys know, when you are the owner of that tank yourself, you can see all of the things that are wrong with it. And one one of the major issues with that system was the wood stand. As all Reef tanks do, as much as we try to avoid it as possible, you always end up with a bit of a leak or a flood at some point in time, and just wood and water doesn't work that well. And unfortunately for me, that wood stand did start to swell and a little bit of rot, and it pretty much kept me up at night. Whenever I heard any sort of bang or crack in the night, I would instantly think that it was the silicon of my display tank letting go, because I knew that stand was not going to be holding exactly true and not going to be as strong as it possibly could be. So it did leave me with a few sleepless nights, and I wanted to make sure that with a new tank, I absolutely never found myself in that position again. And to do that, I went for a huge, massively overrated 80/20, or actually 90/90 extruded aluminium stand. And I've got to say, it was not a cheap option, particularly compared to timber, and even more expensive than steel. But it is one thing that I think has absolutely changed the game for me with this tank. This stand still looks as good as it did on day one. And the fact that I was able to bring it back home in my car myself, assemble it by myself right here in the lounge room, could position it with myself and my wife, or even if I was not being too cautious of the flooring, could push it around myself. It was super light, super easy to work with, completely dismantleable and able to be assembled by myself. It is an absolute game changer, and not that I've really had any floods or leaks with this tank, but if I did, the anodized aluminium would have had no issues with it whatsoever. And I can say that after 5 years of operation, it does not have a single mark on it. Every single fitting and fixture has held up incredibly well, and it's been absolutely worth every single cent I spent on it. Now, that didn't just begin and end there. There were a few other things around the infrastructure and the stand that I really wanted to modernize on this system. And I did that with another huge piece of equipment that was actually a gift to me from Dave at my local fish shop. And that is this incredible acrylic drip tray. This has been custom built by a local reefer who happens to work in the plastics industry to fit my stand to the millimeter. It slots in there with the best tolerance, and it just makes sure that if I ever do have any spills, that they are contained inside that drip tray and they don't end up on my lounge room floor. That has actually come into effect a couple of times where I have had a couple of minor spills that have been contained inside the sump, and I have got measures in place to empty that out, but also to notify me when there are leaks, which does just take all of that stress when you're trying to lay down in bed at night and you hear little pops and cracks. You can rest assured that you know your tank is not leaking and it's not flooding your house. Now, one more component, well actually two more components I want to talk about that have absolutely given this build, the Dream Reef tank, what I would consider an A+ mark in addressing that issue of the old, tired, swelling and rotting wood stand from my previous display tank, is the LED lighting in here. There is nothing worse than when you need to work on your tank and you just can't see what's going on. As it is, sumps are always confined spaces, and having heaps and heaps of LED lighting in there to make sure that I can see every square centimeter of that cabinet is absolutely worth the time, effort and money. Combine that with the fact that I've got the acrylic drip tray and I also have an acrylic ceiling, I guess you'd call it, inside that cabinet. It makes sure that it just glows when I really need to see it. Add to the fact that I have got some smart LED light strips in there, so it's not just on or off. The sensor in there does actually work with what time of day it is, and if I open the cabinet late at night, it only turns the lights on to 10%, and that lets me see without absolutely blinding me. But if I open the cabinet doors during the day, it gives me maximum light, and it works an absolute treat. Now, the final thing I want to talk about on the stand and cabinet of this system is actually the cabinet back boards that we put in here. Now, this is a revolutionary material that I never remember the name of, but it's basically a particle board that's mixed with some foams or some resins to make a waterproof, very light and very easy to work with board. And having that on a slot system, so I can actually pull those panels out if I need, has made working on this system so much easier. I can simply screw into it, I can cut it, I can drill it, I can do whatever I need to do. I know that it will not absorb water. It is completely splash proof. And like I said, if I need to slide them out to get to the slight spaghetti or rat's nest of wires behind the tank, I can do so. And it's been a fantastic thing as well. So all of these little details absolutely added up to what I would consider a pass, or at least an A+ for addressing my issues with my previous display tank that I had around the stand, rotting, swelling, and basically not being structural to hold the tank, as well as making sure that it was all perfectly workable underneath there. A+ from me. Now, the second target I set myself is sort of split into two components, and the first one kind of goes without saying, but I really wanted to end up with a stunning display tank. I cannot tell you how nervous I was to shut down that previous display tank with what I would consider to be a lot of luck in getting it to turn out remotely as good as it did, because to be fair, that was my second reef tank ever, and realistically my second fish tank ever, and the only system I'd had before that was a second-hand Red Sea Max that I'd had for a few months to see whether I wanted to go all out and build a custom reef tank. So to end up with it being as beautiful as it was, I did consider it to be a massive amount of luck, and I did think that rolling the dice a second time around could be asking a little bit too much. And I've got to say, I have seen no shortage of what I would consider to be incredibly talented and very experienced reefers out there who do an upgrade and throw a lot more money, a bigger volume, all of the new knowledge they have in the hobby, and even some of the new methodologies we have in the hobby, and their new tank just never quite hits the same mark that their previous tank did. And I was 100% convinced that I would fall into that category. So I wanted to be 100% certain that when I set out to build this dream reef tank, that I would end up with as good of a display tank, if not better. Otherwise it kind of is irrelevant or a waste of time. Now, I'll let you decide if you think this system looks as good or better than my previous display tank did. I'm finally now at the point, and I probably have been for the last year or two now, where when people come over and they look at my tank and they say, wow, the reef tank's really going strong, and I would say, yeah, it's getting there. It's not as good as my previous display tank, but it's on the way. Now I can finally say with my hand on my heart that I do think it looks better than the previous display tank, and I'll just take that compliment when people say that it looks fantastic. I'll say it does. I'm really proud of it. That was a target that I absolutely had to hit. Now, I did say that this step two, or this second task that I set myself with this tank, wasn't just about having a beautiful display tank. The second part of that was that I wanted it to be as big as it possibly could. Now, there are limitations to that. This was the spot where I wanted to have the reef tank. I did toy about having it as a room divider just over behind the camera there in about a 10 foot by 4 foot long peninsula that would divide this living space, which would have been nothing short of spectacular. But the reality of it was it just didn't really fit the layout of the room that we wanted to go for. It would look spectacular, and you would look from the kitchen through the reef tank to see the living area. It would have been pretty spectacular, but sometimes the living space is a little bit more important than the reef tank. So it was decided that this was the space, which is exactly where my previous tank was. And we'll talk about how I did not want to replicate the tank I had a little bit later. So I wanted to make sure that I made this system as big as I possibly could. Now, there are limitations to that. This space has a finite amount of room. I can only go so far that way before hitting the wall, and I didn't necessarily want this end of the tank here to actually hit the wall, because it would make access and cleaning and just trying to get to things at the back of the tank near impossible. So I left the absolute minimum amount of space there for me to fit in this way, so that this sort of width is the minimum I wanted, and that's exactly what I ended up there. And I ended up using that space there to put a cupboard in to store things like fish food and test kits and reagents and things like that. But I also extended out that side of the house and put a nice little custom built box there to house some of the bigger, bulkier items that I didn't necessarily want down here. So I've got the chiller outside, which keeps all of that noise and heat outside, which is a huge plus. This tank was the first tank I've ever had a chiller on, so making sure I set that up right from the start was a big plus. Putting the UV outside was something that it was kind of a double benefit, I guess, two birds with one stone, if you will, where I wanted to have it outside so that when I did need to change the bulb on that, if I spilt water everywhere or if I was a bit clumsy with it, it wouldn't matter. But secondly, and probably more importantly, it's a massive unit. I've got this big Pentair UV that if I was to put under the cabinet here, it would take up so much space and make all the plumbing things a bit awkward to it. So putting that outside, along with things like my RODI unit and also my CO2 scrubber for the skimmer, just gets those items out of the way and also gets the benefit of having nice fresh air feed. I have also managed, whilst I could not take over behind the tank and take over the laundry, I have managed to take over some of the storage under the sink over there, and that is where things like the CO2 bottle for my calcium reactor goes, and all of the plumbing that goes in and out of this tank, apart from the ones that go out that way. But all of the RO, the freshwater feed for the RO is there, the drain for the tank is there, and also the plumbing for both the automatic water change and the manual 25mm PVC water change all comes through that laundry and into the tank through there. So I was able to go that way a little bit further. When it comes to this dimension here, I do have a hallway there and a door, so I couldn't really go much further there. But I did extend the tank this way as far as I could and ended up with a metric size of 2.1 meters. For the depth this way was something that I really wanted to capitalize on and wanted to go sort of as large as I possibly could without making it ridiculously impossible to get to the back of the tank. I know everyone's concerned about touching the bottom of the tank. I'm not worried about that, but I do want to be able to get to the back wall because I like a clean back wall. So I ended up going 90 centimeters deep, or if you would call it that deep there. I like to call that deep and that high. And then finally, I ended up with 75 centimeters high here, which just gave me the height that I wanted. When you include that the stand is this tall, you can see I'm 6 foot tall and this tank is taller than me. That's the exact sort of presence I wanted. And I've got to say, whilst this system is only a few centimeters longer, deeper and taller than the previous tank, it actually ends up being considerably more liters in volume. I go from about 850 liters in volume up to about 1350, 1400 liters in volume, which is a massive, massive increase. But to me, it's more about the look of the size of the tank, and with the height here, it really has the presence that I want. And when you walk into the house and you see this massive tank up at eye level, it just hits the point I was after. So I think all in all, point 2 really was addressed. I've made this system as big as I possibly can to get that upgrade component, but I also wanted to end up with a beautiful looking display tank because there's no point doing an upgrade and ending up with a tank that doesn't look anywhere near as good as your previous display. So I'm gonna say that that is an A to an A+. I'll let you be the judge and make your own decision. All right, mark number 3 that I set out to achieve, and that was to make this tank look a little bit more modern. As touched on earlier, the opportunity to actually do that upgrade came about because my wife and I decided we wanted to do a very light touch renovation, as I think a lot of people did at the start of COVID, where our lounge room and kitchen and living area here that we spend most of our time in was looking pretty dark, pretty dated. We really wanted to freshen it up, make it look a lot lighter and a lot more modern. Now, put into fact that the Reef tank that was positioned exactly here sort of suited the previous decor. It was dark. It had a black cabinet, very dark, and probably the biggest drawback in my opinion was the canopy up here. The lighting on that tank had evolved over time, and because this is our living space where we have our dining room, our kitchen, and our living room all in one, there were times when you don't exactly want 800 watts of metal halide shining right in your eyes. So I had rigged up a little bit of a DIY canopy that I could take panels off or put them up when I wanted to let the tank breathe, or if I wanted to block a bit of that light and sound out. Now, whilst it sort of did the job, it ended up looking a little bit DIY and just not to the level that I really wanted it to be in our main living area. So one of the major factors that I set out, and I think probably my wife's major driving factor, was to make sure that this tank looked modern, looked clean, and looked absolutely purposeful in this space and didn't look DIY at all. And I've got to say, the cabinetry that Hayden from the Kitchen Design Center designed, built, and installed on this tank has been absolutely incredible. I know a lot of people are aware of the motorized canopy doors, and if you're not, I'll do them now, where I can simply press these buttons, close up that canopy, and all of that light, all of that sound, and even to a lesser extent, that heat is kept inside there and not out here. So when we want to watch a movie, when I want to play some video games, or we just want to have dinner without having a blue light disco in our face, I can close these doors up and you don't notice the fish tank as much. Combine the fact that this is a high quality finish. Hayden did an incredible job. He really hit the mark that I set him to say, I want cabinets that are going to look as good as they do on day one at the 5-year mark. And I can say with my hand on my heart, at the 5-year mark, this cabinetry has not aged a day. There's no rotting, there's no swelling, there's no falling apart. Even the hinges on here that inside the cabinetry here that Hayden said to be best, I should probably replace those, and they're just standard off-the-shelf hinges that I can get from my local hardware store. He said, you might need to replace those every 12 to 18 months. This has been going 5 years. I've not replaced them once, and I've only got a couple of small specks of surface rust that I have not even bothered with. The motorized hinges up here still work as good today as they did the day he installed them, and completely do the purpose of letting the tank breathe and look purposeful when they're open, but also being able to close it up and block that light and that sound when we don't want that intruding on our living space. Now, I'm not going to tell you for a second that this was cheap, and if you do want to dive into how much every single component on the Dream Reef tank cost me, I did do a video with a breakdown covering all of the things that I think were absolutely necessary, all of the things that I thought were an extra expenditure that I probably didn't need to spend. And I summarized it all up and gave you a total for every single dollar I spent up until about the 3-month mark of this system running. So if you want to check out how much the cabinetry cost, you're absolutely more than welcome to. And like I said, the cabinetry was not a cheap operation, but I tell you what a fantastic decision it was. I cannot thank Hayden enough for making it possible, because I set him some very difficult marks to achieve and he absolutely smashed it out of the park. There is not a single thing on this cabinetry that I would change. I think it turned out impeccable. All right, now challenge number 4 that I set myself, and it's one that I recommend to absolutely everyone that is looking to set themselves up a reef tank, and that is to make working on it as easy as you possibly can. Now, I recognize there are limitations to that, even on my very own Dream Reef tank. To get an absolute gold star A+ mark for this, I would say you would have to have a filtration room rather than a sump in the cabinet to make working on the tank as easy as possible. Unfortunately for me, limitations were set and I could not take over the laundry and make that our filtration room. So I was set with the space I had down here. Now, we've talked a little bit about the incredible stand, the drip tray, the back wall, the lighting, everything that I've got in there that makes that work as well as it does. But there is a huge component there that's been a massive, massive change from my previous reef tank, which had a pretty small little raceway sump that just evolved over its 7 years of operation, because I was learning new things in the hobby itself was evolving, and equipment changes were happening almost every month, which did make having a sump that was purpose-built quite difficult. Now, I did set out in the planning phases of this tank to work out exactly to the millimeter how I wanted this sump to operate, and I reached out to the guys at Hamali to have that custom built, and they delivered. This sump has done everything I've asked of it and more, and there's not a single thing I would change on it. The roller mat works a treat. The plumbing lines up perfectly. I've got a nice little cryptic zone that comes into a purpose-built filter roller. The skimmer section is big enough without being too big. There's no wasted space there. Moving on to the refugium, which is big enough again. If I could have gone bigger on the refugium, I would, but this was as big as I could possibly make it. Before moving on to ceramic media to get that biological filtration, and then into the final section there where I've got my 2 Abiz A400s, which is another huge component of having something that's easy to work on, is being able to have quality equipment in there. And I can say on my previous display tank, I had gone about saving up my biscuits and buying some really high-end equipment that I was going to use on my tank upgrade. And just before I'd finished getting things like return pumps, skimmers, heaters, all the media reactors and everything like that all lined up, my beautiful dash hound went and got IVDD in her back and took about a $10,000 operation. So to fund that, I had to sell all of that equipment that I'd been slowly chipping away at. But the good news is my beautiful dash hound Olive is still happy and walks around perfectly well. So all's well end well there, but it is a huge component of having something that's easy to work on, is having quality equipment that is easy to work on, but also doesn't require you to work on it all that often. The sump houses all of that equipment perfectly. The fact that it's got the RODI chamber built into it, it does have enough flexibility there for me to change approaches, methodologies if I want to, just like I have. I've added a Kalkwasser reactor. I've gone from doing moonshiners to trying a little bit of Triton Core 7 Flex. I've tried different trace element dosing. I've tried different things in the refugium, and basically the sump has accommodated each and every one of those steps. A huge part of the success of this sump, though, I think, was a thing that I've got to give a massive shout out to Dave at Deer Park, my local fish shop. He insisted that I design it so that the baffles of the sump line up perfectly with the uprights of my stand, so that when I am working on things, like if I need to get to the skimmer like I do here, I can take that out without having to work around a pillar of the stand. Likewise my filter roller, and of course, likewise my refugium. Very, very good bit of information that Dave absolutely saved me from just moving a baffle out a bit further, maybe to make that refugium a little bit bigger. But then there's no point it being any bigger if you can't really access it or work on it. All of these little details definitely added up to make a system that is considerably easier to work on. And that's just below the tank. I did mention having the motorized cabinetry above the tank, but another massive factor has been this motorized light frame that I've got to tell you was just one of those things that hit me in the middle of the night when I was trying to work out how to make a light frame be accessible, but also be able to get it down over the tank where I wanted when I'm not working on the system. This sit-stand desk with some extruded aluminium has been a huge, huge game changer. The number of times I bumped my lights on my previous display tank, which the light frame on that was a little bit sketchy, risked dropping lights in the tank, electrocution, damaging lights, just not getting access to the tank. This system has been impeccable, and it was so cheap and easy to implement before the tank went in. If you haven't seen the operation, I'll show you now. It is literally a sit-stand desk that basically allows me to motorize these lights so I can lift them right up out of the way, stop them there, and then I can get into the tank and work away, whether I'm cutting a coral back, trying to remove some aptasia, catch a fish, or of course if I'm gluing a new bit of coral in. Gives me so much room to work. It is incredible. If you are setting out to build yourself a dream reef tank, definitely consider how you can do this. And I've got to say, I have seen a number of systems all around the world now that have adopted this system, and every time I see it, it puts a huge smile on my face, because realistically, it does not cost that much money. There is a bit of work involved to it, but once it's done, it is set and forget. Look into a sit-stand desk for your lights. So I guess if I'm going to grade myself, I think I would give this probably a B+ to A. Like I said, I think to achieve that A+ mark, I'd really need to have this sump in a filtration room where I could work at waist height rather than getting down there on my hands and knees and working in the sump. But given the confines I had, I think this has been more than a pass. It's been a fantastic result. And whilst I'm not getting any younger, and I do definitely have a much more time-absorbing YouTube channel now than when I did with my previous tank, this system has still been an absolute joy to work on, and there's few key components that I talked about have made that possible. So I think we've set out to achieve what we wanted to do, and it's by far streets ahead of where I was with my previous display tank. All right, lastly, the fifth target that I set myself when setting up this dream reef tank was not to replicate my previous display tank. The last thing I wanted to do after deciding to pull the pin on that display tank out, what many would say was its absolute peak, was to go through all of the time, effort, money, frustration, blood, sweat and tears to end up putting another tank in the same place that looked exactly the same. Whilst it would have been nice to address things like the stand and get a better sump and have a light frame that worked, it kind of all falls into insignificance if the tank itself ends up looking exactly like what was there before. And for that reason, I was very conscious of coral selection to make sure that I didn't put exactly the corals back in the tank. Whilst that's easier said than done, because typically, if you like a type of coral, you're drawn to it and you end up having that in every tank you've ever had. So I was trying to be as mindful as I could and trying to learn some things about coral placement that may or may not have worked. But I do think that I've done well enough to not replicate the tank I had before. One of the hardest decisions of that was to not put Dallas staghorn in this tank. It was the absolute showpiece of my previous display tank at a good 2-foot cube, I would say, of green, bright green staghorn. Had the toxic green polyps on it. It was an absolute showpiece coral. And ironically, when I had that in that previous display tank, that coral was as common as anything out there here in Australia. And so many reefers said, get rid of it. It's taking up so much real estate. It's this boring old Dallas. In this tank, I made sure that I never put Dallas in the system, despite wanting to so many times, just so that I didn't end up replicating that tank. And ironically, now Dallas is not that common and sells for quite a lot for a small frag, which, I don't know, that's just the way reefing goes. But I guess, I think the end target was to not end up with the same tank. Apart from maybe some Monty caps in similar placements, I think I've pretty much achieved that. So I'm gonna give myself a tick and a pass, maybe not an A+, but at least a pass for that target. So with those 5 targets now discussed and all of the measures that I put in place to make sure that I achieve those targets, I think it's a fantastic opportunity now to bring the camera in. We'll get the DSLR in from the top down and we'll have a good close look at this reef tank as it hits its 5-year birthday, just to see how everything's going. Because like I said at the start, you really don't get an appreciation for how massive these colonies are from that camera angle. You really only see it from the top down. So I'll grab the camera, we'll jump in and have a good look at that now. Alright, to start things off, I just want to show you how close to breaching the surface this Dustin's cousin coral is. It's about 8 to 10 millimeters off breaching the surface, and it is a monster of a piece. I'll give you a little bit of a look at it from the front here. You can see the big red dragon there. I've got digis coming out the side, some more Dustin's cousin, more digis, another green stag over here, and then there's a few pieces down here on the sand that, to be honest, look a little bit scrappy at the moment. I've got a couple of frags down there, some pectinias. These gonies don't look too bad. You can see this Dustin's cousin growing down here has more color because it's in less light, and it actually grew there from a bit that broke off, fell on the sand and grew from there, which is pretty cool. That big Monty there is really cool. We'll get a better look at it from the top down, where I've got another piece of it up the back. Then we come across to my hammer garden, which went through its issues, and I lost my absolute prize piece, my big stunning gold hammer. But I can say now the 3 hammers I've got left look really healthy and do seem to be enjoying life. Quick rare glimpse of my marine beta there. If you don't have a marine beta in your system, and there goes my mandarin, or one of my mandarins as well, I highly recommend you get one of these fish. They are the most beautiful fish I've seen in a marine aquarium, and really difficult to get very socialized, and show a lot of take a lot of patience to get them very social, and very rewarding when you get there. This view shows, apart from my long-nosed hawkfish, just how big that Dustin's cousin and of course the red Monty cap is, and you can also see just how close we are to the surface there as well. But we'll branch on down and suss out things from the top down, and you can see here this hammer has incredible color to it, that really bright toxic color to it. This one here, whilst it's not my gold, it is a nice yellow, and then that nice toxic reverse there looks pretty decent indeed. There is a little shot there of some nice disco morphs I've got down the base there, beautiful. I'll give you a better shot of those in a minute. I do have one more hammer down there on the base, which is just sort of a little bit of spillover, and I've got a really nice glittergony that I've thought that I've lost a couple of times now, but it keeps coming back, which is a nice little bonus, a little testament to the Triton foods that I've been trying out of late. Now, getting up to this monster red cap, and you can actually see the growth ring on it there. The top centimeter, or the outside centimeter of each one of those little curls has a completely different color to it. It's got that white outside edge, but then also just a different colored red around it. You can see it keeps going back and back and back. It looks a little bit sad up here where it gets absolutely blasted by that MP60, which is understandable, but other than that, this thing just grows and grows and grows, and is definitely one of the corals that I think I need to trim back. It just grows too quickly. You see here I've got a nice piece of pink digi here. That's been growing quite well despite all of the competition for real estate there. Nice little bit of green goblin underneath it there. Some nice acro in here. In fact, I can see this really nice little purple smooth skin piece, which probably doesn't get the flowers it deserves in there, because it kind of just looks like coralline algae, but it's this beautiful smooth skin piece. Heading back up here, you can see there is a bit of blue stag in there hanging on for dear life. We've got this really nice bird's nest here that I picked up from Rob. That's pink with green tips. I love it. I want to try and get that a bit more of a pride position, really get it really showcasing its wares there. And then up above the Monty here, if I can get the camera to get there without taking it out of the water, I've got this stunning yellow acro with nice red polyps on it. This is a little snippet I just took off a wild piece that came into Deer Park Aquarium, and I absolutely love it. See the grafted Sunfire Monty cap doing well, and there's that bird's nest that I said, probably one of my favorite pieces in the tank, and is absolutely getting no love back there. So I need to take a frag of that and get it into a more prominent position. Now, speaking of prominent positions, here is this Dustin's cousin. I am struggling to get it to focus, and you can see where it's in highlight, it's pretty much all blue. In fact, looking there, you can see a little bit more of that pink smooth skin, or that purple smooth skin. But next to it, you can see the Dustin's cousin that is getting shaded, and that does have green throughout it. When it's getting a lot of light, it's solid blue. When it's getting getting a bit less light, it is green and blue, and obviously the green and blue is actually what you want. So it's one of those corals that probably should get a little bit less light, but it's difficult when it's about half a centimetre below the surface. Now you can see some of that Monty there. We'll get a better look at it in a second because it's sort of getting smothered there by some other corals, but you can see that gorgeous candy cane there. We'll come back to that one. There is a nice fungia there, and here is that candy cane that I was talking about, doing just enough to get some light there, smooshed in between the Dustin's cousin. You've got that beautiful red Monty, that real thick branch red Monty that I've really got to free up a bit of space because it is getting attacked from all directions. And then you have this massive red dragon. Now I've got to say, this is one of my favorite corals in the tank. Despite the fact it grows quite fast and is a little bit of a weed, I absolutely love the color of it, and I love the real bright little polyps it gets. It just gives it that sort of cherry blossom sort of look to it. It is a piece that will absolutely stay in my tank in one shape or another. Probably just need one colony of it, not 3 or 4 like I have at the moment. Now up behind here is a little bit of a wasteland, and I'll get the camera to focus. There's a cherry bomb there that's getting a bit of cyano through it, some pale or bleached out green goblin. There is this piece here which has actually become quite a large colony, and in my tank in the light it looks kind of grey or brown, but I've taken frags of this into Deer Park Aquarium and put it in lower light, and it has a rainbow of colours through it. It just is one of those ones that wants lower light. So despite the fact that it looks really happy and healthy in my tank, it's just not getting all the colours. Now, speaking of colours, here is this massive red Monty up the back of my tank here that has actually bridged the back wall and the rockwork together and is trying to smother out another blue stag there. I've got way too many blue stags in this tank, but it's really anchoring that rockwork in place. You see a few aptasias there, and then we move on to another colony of Dustin's cousin. There's actually a lobo in under there. We've got some more pink digi. We've got some bonsais here. We've got that green aspera there. We've got some nice tabling red there, which is actually, I thought it was going to die. There's a massive bubble coral on the base there. And here is the top-down view of that Dustin's cousin piece that actually broke off and grew from the sand bed, and you can see it has way better colours down there. But here's another look at the nice placement here of that bright green aspera that I got from ARC Corals in Sydney. Got this nice little highlighter tipped acro here. Got this grey piece that I'm waiting for it to do something. Hasn't yet. You get some nice bonsai pieces in there. Yet more red dragon. Yeah, it sort of just breaks off and lands somewhere. And yet more Dustin's cousin. So you can see I've got a couple of colonies there that I probably need to thin out a little bit and make some space for other things, which ironically I already did. I took out the big blue digi here probably about 6 months ago, and they've grown in their place. They've got some nice smooth skin green up there. Love that, with some standard green digi. We've got yet another blue stag. Way too many blue stags in this tank. And then we come across here, yes, more red dragon, yes, a little bit of cyano, a little bit of aptasia, some more pink digi, yeah, a little bit of a repeat of a few corals here, a little bit of the blue digi that has remained in the tank despite my best efforts to get it all out. There is a random recordia in there. You've got some TNT there, or yeah, TNT I believe, and some PC rainbow. There's that really nice smooth skin green that actually looks fantastic next to the blue digi. So maybe I need to make that work a little bit better. And you can see a couple of other random sort of strawberry shortcakes and things in there. You can see the the Space Invader Pectinia. They're not getting a lot of light. We'll get a look at that from the front on in a second. And some Space Invader or Raja Rampage Chalice. There is a little bit of Walt Disney frag on the base there and a little bit of another yellow frag. And actually, if I can get the camera to pan up here once we get past the green stag and more red dragon. Too much red dragon. Like, you can see how healthy that green stag is. We'll get to my frag rack, which does have a piece I'm super excited to have. I picked this up from Ilias recently. A bit of orange setosa is a coral from my trip in Sydney that I was desperate to find a piece of. Ilias hooked me up, and I've got a few other frags from him here as well. Some exciting pieces there. But that orange setosa is going to definitely feature on this tank moving forward. Up here I've got some more Sunfire grafted Monty Cap. I've also got a red and purple. You can see I've had to break a branch off, and I took that into the guys at Deer Park Aquarium because they had a really stunning piece of this that just died out. So I wanted to give them another piece to give it another shot.
Here we've got this lovely fluffy Rhodactis, and I've got this monster gold Recordia that just, of course, today decided it wanted to face away from the camera, but you can see the number of pups it has. And then over on this side, you get a better view of those awesome disco morphs I've got there. Pure gold coloration to them, absolutely love it. Also got some blue Tongan Rhodactis in here, which is not something I've seen for a while, and here's a decent view of that glitter Goni. This is the one that I thought I was going to lose, but it's come back better than ever thanks to that Triton feed, and the glitter in it is as good as it's ever been. Speaking of Gonis I thought I was going to lose, here's the red one that my clownfish like to smush right in. The Triton infused food has managed to bring that one back from the brink. And then if we pan over here, you'll get a better view of the Space Invader Pectinia. You see it's sort of shaded itself on the bottom, but it's growing out towards the light. And that pretty well wraps up the top-down view of all of my corals.
All right, that may leave you asking the question, what is next for the Dream Reef Tank? That's what's happened in the first 5 years, and that is how I've gone about in making sure that I stayed on track to achieve what I wanted to achieve with this tank and not just replicate the mistakes I'd made with my previous display tank. But what does it mean for the Dream Reef Tank as we go into year 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where I did say this tank's realistically got a 10 to 15 year lifespan? There are some big changes coming very, very soon. I have talked about a number of times previously about giving a big refresh of the coral in this system, and it's something that I've really mulled over quite a lot over the last few months. Did I want to strip everything out, start fresh, basically reboot this tank for a whole new 5-year journey? Did I want to take a couple of colonies out that I didn't like anymore? Did I want to give everything just a little bit of a trim back and just sort of do that every few months? Or what I've really decided, well, I'm pretty sure I've decided, is to give some of these colonies in here a really big trim back, and I'll do that over a period of time just to make sure I don't shock the system too much, just to make sure that it's not killing itself underneath too much. There's plenty of light, plenty of flow, just to make sure that it doesn't go into an old tank syndrome. But I think what I really want to do with this system, and it's much easier to say at the 5-year mark than it is at the 0-year mark, is to reduce the number of corals I have in the system. Now, I'm not talking about the coral volume, but the number of corals that I've got in the system. It's all good and well when you've got a completely empty tank to put, 60, 80 frags in there, and it actually, you can see them, and then they start to grow, then they get massive, they grow into each other, and you've kind of got this vomit of coral like I do here now, which, don't get me wrong, it looks cool. But I think what I really want to do now is to take some of the corals that I don't like as much out and really try to focus on having maybe somewhere around the 10 to 15 big corals in the system, rather than trying to overload the sensors with heaps and heaps of pieces in there. Just have really big mature colonies with some contrasting color in there. I haven't completely decided on what colonies I want to have. There probably will be some sort of Monty Cap, there will be some sort of stag, maybe some red dragon, and maybe something over here. I'm not sure whether it's this green stag or whether I focus a bit more on some of the bird's nests and things down there. I do want to try and limit some of the clutter down here, so I'll probably try to limit some of those corals a little bit. And of course, I will still give some of these big colonies a real trim back, so I can give them a bit of space in between there. Things like this piece up here, the red dragon, and the Dustin's cousin there are just so intertwined that they really need a little bit of breathing space, so I might cut those back. And that is something that I am probably going to approach over the next 6 or so months, because the last thing I want to do is go in there with a hacksaw and put this system through a massive, massive shock and not just trim things out, but end up wiping the whole tank out. So I will be very slowly removing corals from here. And if there is anything in this system that you are interested in and you are able to get down to Deer Park Aquarium, please let me know, because I will be pulling corals out of this system. And if there's something that you want to frag of, let me know. I'll get it out and I'll keep it at Deer Park Aquarium for you. We'll work through all the details, but pretty much everything in here will be available to some extent. Some things might only have 1 frag, other things might have 1,000 frags. So let me know what you're chasing, and I'll see if I can take care of you, because it is a good part of this hobby that I really enjoy, is getting to see your corals make their way out into other people's tanks, and so on and so on. It's really cool. And I've got to say, I've been fortunate enough to have that here. I've got some beautiful corals over the back there from Rob, one of my very favorite viewers. He gave me this beautiful bird's nest. It's this pink bird's nest with green tips. He got a small frag to me and I put it in the back so that it had plenty of time to settle in without me staring at it all the time, and it's really started to find its feet now. And I've had some fantastic pieces that were gifted to me from the guys at ARC Aquariums up in Sydney. Really appreciate it. I've got some gonies that I got from Mariah and Only Reefs, and some pieces that I got from Nick, like a beautiful Monty cap up the back there from Nick's Aquariums in Queensland. So it's been really cool to get a number of pieces from a lot of my reefing buddies, and I really did enjoy when I shut down my previous tank, parting out all the corals and getting them out to so many reefers out there. And then in years' time, finding out they're like, that's your Dallas in there that's growing. It was something that really I did enjoy in this hobby. So I'm hoping to do something similar with this tank without shutting it down, but just trimming it back a little bit. So I guess the point of that story is if you are interested in something, reach out, let me know, and we'll make it happen. All right, guys, there you have it. That is the 5-year, I guess you'd call it overview, or maybe a review of the targets I set myself for the Dream Reef tank. I hope you have enjoyed the journey. I cannot believe it's been 5 years. It has gone so fast. And to think that this tank is almost as old as my previous tank was when I shut it down is scary and a little bit mind-blowing, but I'm super relieved to say that this system is in so much better shape than that tank was, and this system is absolutely nowhere near the point of me shutting it down. It has absolutely got another 5 to 10 years in it, if not more, but we'll see how things hold up. I think 5 years will be no problem at all. 10 years should be pretty achievable, and anything beyond that is probably a little bit hard to predict at this point in time. But so far, so good with the Dream Reef tank, and I'm really pleased to say that I managed to stay true to myself and stay on course and really address those points that I set out to fix with this system. And I really appreciate all of you guys for following along. The amount of feedback that I've got throughout this journey, I've got to say I have sort of been pretty vulnerable in sharing each one of the steps with you, warts and all, and I've had some fantastic feedback along the way and really picked up some good tips that have made this tank what it is today. So thank you so much for following the journey, and I could not say thank you without giving a massive shout out to these names on screen here. These guys are my channel members who chip in a couple of dollars each and every month to make these videos possible, and it really does go a long way. So thank you so much. You do make these videos possible, and if you do want to support the channel but you don't have a couple of dollars to spare, fear not. You can do so by hitting the subscribe button in that bottom corner down there. That goes a long way. We're nearing 34,000 subscribers, which doesn't cost you a cent today, tomorrow, in any time in the future, but it does tell YouTube that you think this is good content and helps recommend it to other viewers out there. So if you get to subscribe, please consider doing so. And of course, if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, anything at all, for me, for the Dream Reef tank, for anything else on this channel, feel free to put it in the comment section down below. I have set out to answer every single question that goes on there personally myself. I've done that for a number of years now, and I will continue to do so, because to me, it is the absolute least I can do to show my appreciation for you guys taking the time to watch the videos and then ask questions about them. So please don't hesitate at all. Put your comments in there and I will personally respond to them. But other than that, guys, I think we should wrap it up. Once again, thank you so much for following along this journey. I can't believe it's been 5 years. Really look forward to seeing where the next 5 years go. We've got some amazing things coming on the channel, like the brand new Mastertronic Essentials is due here any day now. It is in the mail, and I am watching the doorbell like a hawk, because the Aramex delivery driver has my Mastertronic Essentials ready to go, and I cannot wait to plug that up and see how it goes against the suite of other automated testers out there and really see if it is the future of reef keeping. We'll find out in the coming weeks, but I should wrap things up there, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Cheers, bye.